This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Mayor Mark Luttrell and the County Commission on the county's budget surplus tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I am joined tonight by Shelby County Mayor Mark Luttrell. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you, Eric.
Van Turner from the County Commission. Thank you for being here again.
Thank you.
And also Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. And so, Mayor Luttrell, we've talked some. We had the county trustee, and Van was on, and Harvey Kennedy from your office about a month ago talking about this kind of unexpected surplus, $22 million that came in ahead of the projected collections. And it's a good thing, I guess, but there are problems, and it's how to handle that money. And you have called in part for a budget summit, some kind of gathering. And let me ask you, what do you mean by a budget summit, and why do you think that's important?
Well, first of all, Eric, I think it's just good and certainly proper that periodically the executive and legislative branches sit down outside of the formal setting of a meeting and discuss our priorities, discuss our differences, have a level playing field as far as the discussion is concerned, bring up our concerns, bring up where we disagree, and use that as an opportunity to really kind of clear the air. This is really the first budget for many of our new county commissioners. So it's an opportunity for us to kind of assess what we have done, and also to kind of move forward. I made a comment to someone just the other day. Said that I've been mayor now for 5 years, and each year is a little bit different. And certainly after an election, when you have a new county commission, the mayor needs to kind of readjust to the dynamics of that county commission. Right. So I think it's time that we do that. And this was a budget season that had a lot of discussion and a lot of questions that were raised subsequent to the approval of the budget. And I just thought it'd be good to sit down and see if we could work through some of those.
Well, I have a bunch of questions on things you just said, but let me get Van in here. Your sense for you personally, would you like to do a budget summit, and then what's your sense of the other commissioners?
Yes, I think that a budget summit would be a really good thing to have. As the mayor indicated, we have a few new commissioners that are on this current commission, and I think it's good to go through this type of process of sort of analyzing the budget, seeing what has been done in the past, seeing what opportunities are ahead of us, seeing how we address the surplus, and seeing how we keep a surplus. Moving forward. And
when we talk about new commissioners, you're in your second, third year. Where are you?
This is my first year.
This is your first year. Yeah. See, I move things too quickly here. And we were talking before the show about term limits, and I'm curious if term limits have changed this dynamic. I mean, you've got commissioners who haven't been through as many budget seasons. I mean, there are pros and cons to people with term limits, but one is that you have less experience. That's one of the criticisms of term limits. You just, by its nature, you have less experienced people who are newer to the process. Is that part of what you think goes on there?
Yeah, I understand the public's desire for term limits, and I certainly support the term limit provision that's in our charter. But there are certain disadvantages to that because public finance is pretty darn complicated. You've got money coming from several different sources, coming at the federal level, the state level, locally, money with restrictions on how it can be used and how it can be spent, certain procedures that must be followed before you can even spend the money. So it's the whole issue of public finance is very, very complicated. And it's taken me, as the county mayor, it's taken me 5 years to get comfortable with the process. So it's not something that you learn overnight. That's why I think it's important that we have this meeting so that we can sit down and really assess some of the rigors that we experienced in this last budget year and see if we can be a little bit better prepared, both on the administration side and on the commission side as we move forward to the next season.
It's part of this too that, I mean, the economy is getting better, and that begins to play. I mean, we talked about that with the trustee and the improved collections and so on. The economy is generally getting better. And so property tax values, the real estate market's moving again. All those things are happening that when you took office, you took office in the depths of the recession. That's a different budgeting process than the good problem to have, which is probably rising collections. We've got, a reappraisal in a year, which I know technically doesn't change the amount of revenue, but it means some choices to be made. So is that also part of the summit, that it's a kind of a new environment than it was for these last
Well, it is.
years?
I would say, relatively speaking, we're healthier today than we were 4 years ago. But that said, there are a number of critical needs that have not been addressed over the last few years that I think need to be addressed. And I think we started addressing them this year with the commission on some of our grant procedures that we'll be following going forward. But I like to say that we're a community with finite resources and infinite needs. And we need, in this summit, to really sit down and see if we can come to an understanding of how we're going to deal with the growing success that we're having.
Yeah. Bill?
We should also point out that Van Turner, in addition to being county commissioner, is the vice chairman of the county commission, and the county commission will try this coming Monday to elect a new chairman. In lieu of that, you are the acting chairman of the body. So with that in mind, Mr. Chairman, tell me what you think the sense of the body is, because as the mayor has mentioned, this past budget season, there were some, let's say, vigorous discussions about the ways that, at that time, a $6 million surplus should be spent.
Well, as we all know, we had the fortune of having the $6 million surplus, and the question was how we would spend that surplus. And I think that you saw a healthy debate. You saw what occurred, and we did figure out what we wanted to do with that $6 million surplus, and I think it was handled well. The whole point of each commissioner having an allotment of funds to plow down into their district for that district's needs, I think it's a good thing that came out of this budget season. I know the mayor talked about blight. That's something we have to address. I represent Hickory Hill. Blight is an issue in Hickory Hill as it is throughout the county, and these would be things I think the mayor would probably want to be focused on moving forward. That's something that the commission is interested in moving forward. So I think the summit will, one, allow us to see what we agree on, because we do probably agree on a lot of things, and see how we can address those concerns first. And then I think we will go into the separate concerns that each of the commissioners would have for their own district, and seeing how we can get that addressed as well.
Mayor, several of the commissioners pushed for a rollback, taking a cent. In some cases, the proposal was up to 4 cents off of the property tax rate, just with the $6 million surplus. With a $22 million surplus, what are your views at looking at some kind of property tax rollback?
Well, first of all, let's distinguish between the difference between the $6 million and the $22 million. The $6 million is strictly in the general fund. The $22 million, general fund, debt service, and education. So if you actually look at the general fund, we were projecting about a $6 million overage, and we realized about a $7 million. So the balance of that was in education and in debt service. We were able, going forward, to take $10 million of that and put it into education for this coming fiscal year. And then also the balance go into debt service. We still have a huge debt in this county. We have a debt that's still over $1 billion, and we're gradually whittling that down. So again, it's how we break down the dollars, how we deal with the efficiency that, quite frankly, we had this past year in tax collection. How we project forward a little bit. One of the things that I think that we can discuss at this summit. Tax collections typically come in highest in December, February, and March. We submit our budget to the county commission at the end of March, where we really don't have a real accurate picture of what our revenue will be for the next year. What I would like for us to discuss at the summit is, can we move that March 31st deadline to April 31st or April 30th, and give us a little bit more time to sharpen our pencil and have a little clearer view of what our projections will be. We used to do it that way, and I guess it was probably 10 years ago that it was moved back to March. And I think we probably need to consider, if we've got some flexibility in there, let's take advantage of that flexibility, Commission and the county administration, to see if we can get a little sharper picture, a little bit more accurate assessment of what our revenues will be in the next year.
Van, after going through one budget season over there, what do you think about that? Because historically, legislative bodies, the City Council and the County Commission, have always kind of pushed to get this budget discussion going as early as possible. Is this a reasonable move to go for an April start of your budget season?
Yeah, I think so. What we realized this go around was that the early start really didn't give us an accurate projection of what revenues were coming in. I think pushing that date back by 30 days, we're not saying push it back by 60 days or 90 days, just 30 days, will allow, as the mayor has indicated, the administration to have a better picture of what the collections are looking like. I'm sure Trustee Lenore would, want that as well, because he's actually getting the money in, and he could give a better projection of what we're looking at. And I think it would be better for all parties to have a more clear projection of what the revenues look like, and we could probably have a better budget discussion moving forward.
So Mayor, with the education funding and the greater than expected tax collections, you were able to devote that to education funding, which you had funded before this with revenue from the wheel tax, which raises some questions about the wheel tax. Do you need the wheel tax there? There's always been talk about, should we have the wheel tax? Should the wheel tax be abolished, or should it be phased out at some point? Do you still need it?
Let's keep in mind that 100% of the wheel tax goes to education. And once we establish our maintenance of effort level, and I think that comes up this year, is our maintenance of effort will be established. That's $30 million that goes to education that will have to continue to go to education under the maintenance of effort. So if we eliminate the wheel tax, we've still got to come up with $30 million to give to education. Now, if our economy can make a huge swing for the better and can start generating more in that area, then I think certainly the wheel tax might be a consideration. But I think it's far too far in the future for us to consider that at this time. $30 million will have to continue to go to education. I don't think any of us are considering cutting back education by $30 million. But if we can continue to see growth in our economy, that's going to be the key to really eliminating our wheel tax.
But isn't part of the trick on that? I mean, some people say part of the problem is the property taxes are too high. So I mean, it's obviously it's a balancing act, but the high property taxes drive people to Fayette County. They drive them to Davidson County and Nashville. They drive them just across the border into DeSoto County. So how do you weigh that?
I don't necessarily buy that argument.
But you're a Republican. You're supposed to buy that argument. You're supposed to. That's not possible.
I do believe that our taxes are too high.
Okay.
I don't believe it's taxes that are driving people out of our community. I would like to see our tax rate cut down. And I think if we can continue to grow the economy as we go into our discussions in the budget season, that's one of the things that we'll talk about. If things are still robust and we still see growth, we can look at things like the wheel tax. We can look at things like education, what our priority is there. But as far as people counting the headlights as they move out of Shelby County,
right.
It's not that. What I think it is more than anything else is causing us to lose our population is comprehensively the livability of our community, which covers everything from crime to education to health care to jobs to poverty to any number of social issues that impact the livability and the person's satisfaction with where they're residing. We've got to look comprehensively at all of those issues if we're going to stem the out-migration.
Right. Would you agree? I mean, do you think, taxes apart, do they drive people out of your district?
Well, no, I don't think so. And I think people generally would do what it takes to make sure that education is supported, because when you look at crime and other issues, poverty, you have to start first with education. If our youth are not being properly educated, then they turn to crime. They end up in poverty, and all these other social ills really follow with lack of proper education. So I don't think, at least my constituents would be in favor of cutting any funding to education. And I sort of agree with the mayor. We have to look at it comprehensively. But I am very thrilled to see the growth in the city of Memphis. I think if we continue the trend, that will increase property taxes for the city and the county, and it will attract people back into the heart of the city, which when that happens, it improves the county as well.
Yeah, we talk about education. I know it's not directly in your purview, but I'm curious your comments, perspective on it. Shelby County Schools has filed a lawsuit against the state to fully fund BEP. We can get into the technicalities of that, but the gist is the governor says, you know, we'd like to fully fund BEP, we just don't have the money. Were you happy, surprised? I'll start with you, Mayor Luttrow. When you saw that lawsuit filed, do you feel like it's a distraction? I mean, lawsuits go on, they're expensive.
Governor Haslam genuinely has tried to improve funding in education. We received this year a significant bump in education appropriations from the state level. I do think there's some validity to his concern that there's not enough money to fully fund BEP. And BEP is not fully funded. I would agree that we're not getting all the money that we should be getting under the BEP formula.
I mean, some people have estimated as much as $100 million. Is that right, Bill?
That's,
I mean,
I've heard
Chris Caldwell
the
on
number. And there's some question as to just how valid the BEP formula is, and maybe the BEP formula needs to be discussed. I don't think we could expect to get $100 million out of the state, $100 million more. But that said, I would prefer that we not sue at this time. I think that we should give the governor, who's shown a good faith effort to try to increase spending in education, to give him some time to try to continue to work through this.
Van, your take on again, the county didn't vote on, the commission didn't vote on it, but you all do fund, I mean, it's a huge amount of funds that the county puts into the schools. Do you think that's a good move on their part, or is that a distraction?
You know, I think I'm a lawyer, so I can see the benefit of having some form of litigation to at least start the conversation. Most times, this sort of litigation ends with the mediation. It ends with the settlement. And so my sense of it is this will get the conversation moving in the right direction. I'm thinking a settlement is where down the road, and I think that settlement would benefit education. It will put more funding into BEP, but I think not doing anything may not be an option at this point. I think that's why they're filing the suit. But I do think that this will start the conversation, hopefully move the legislators towards a resolution, and we'll get some more funding for the BEP.
Yeah, okay. Bill.
The commission certainly discussed hiring counsel to wade into this as well. I guess depending on how the talks go between the litigants at this point, the commission will make its decision on whether or not it wants to join this.
Yeah, and litigation can be costly. I think that's something that we looked at. And if the lawsuit that is proceeding forward is a good lawsuit, we'll benefit from it anyway. And so we may just do what they would call a friendly brief, which will not incur a lot of expenses or fees, but it would show that we do support the effort to fully fund BEP. And I do realize that Governor Haslam is a proponent of education. We all respect that, but we really have to fight for the children in this community, for the students, knowing that education is really the base of it all. When you look at poverty, when you look at all these issues, crime, you really have to make sure you're focused on education. And I think Governor Haslam understands that, and he gets it, and I'm hopeful that we'll have a resolution to that lawsuit.
Mayor, let's talk about setting the maintenance of effort for the school system. This demerger reset the clock on that over 3 fiscal years, and we're I think a year into it, possibly 2 years. At any rate, are you satisfied that things are stabilizing in terms of that setup to the degree that the process of setting maintenance of effort will be a fairly stable process?
You know, Bill, we had the reset because of the demerger, and then the creation of the suburban districts caused another reset. So you're right. I don't know if we're at the 2nd or 3rd year of that reset. I think we're moving into the 3rd year of that reset. Am I pleased with how it is settling in? There's some districts that I think are probably settling into this new model quicker and better than others. Others are still kind of feeling their way through it. So I don't think that there's really stability across the board that we would like to see. We know that Superintendent Hobson has his hands full with a lot of issues as it relates to the county school system, not the least of which is the retiree benefits, the OPEB situation, which has got to be addressed, I think, rather aggressively by the schools. So there's some uncertainty in my mind as to whether or not they are ready to really establish the maintenance of effort level. That said, as we move beyond maintenance of effort, obviously if we see that there's a need for more money, you can reset that maintenance of effort going forward. You just can't back up on it unless there's a decrease in enrollment. So it's not a panic situation. It's just a situation where maybe we're not as stable in seeing our financial future in education as I would like for us to be. But it's still something that can be achieved in the years to come.
Van, the Commission's discussion at budget time what involved the OPEB liability, the benefits liability that the mayor just discussed. Ultimately, the school system decided to use the county funding for other priorities other than that as they continue to discuss Superintendent Hobson's plan for that. Mm-hmm. What's your view on how the school system is moving on those fronts?
I have a lot of respect for Superintendent Hobson. I actually worked for him at a point in time. He was the general counsel and I was an associate general counsel. So as the mayor has indicated, his hands are full. I think his heart is in the right place. He has a good team that he has with him, and I'm hopeful that they'll address those issues. But as was indicated, they have to do something to address the OPEB liability. That could be something that could be a major issue, as we've seen with the city, and we know that the county had an issue, but it started to address that issue a long time ago, and I think we're in a good place now. And so what we're asking the school board, along with Superintendent Hobson, is to really take a hard look at that issue and start addressing it now, because as seen with other governments, it could be a problem later on down in the future.
Are the schools subject to the law that was passed? That all the cities in Tennessee are subject to the law that says you got to rein in your debt, and so that was passed. Mark Norris, others were involved, but are schools subject to that? I'm looking at Bill. Well, I'm looking at you.
And Van, you might want to help with this. As I understand it, the schools are not covered under that law, okay. But it's the same problem, right. And I think we're certainly getting indications from the comptroller's office in Nashville that right. we need to get this addressed.
We could expand that law if you don't.
Yeah. And what I'd really emphasize is county government's the default on the school financial situation. Right. So if the schools don't deal with it and there is some repercussions, right. then it's going to default to the county to really fix the problem. So that's why Van and I are so interested in making sure that the schools do aggressively address this.
We've talked about the state some. I saw you at the governor was doing a tour, an infrastructure tour, talking about needs of infrastructure. A month ago, I think he was, give or take, he was in Memphis. And they put a very simple chart on the wall that the gas tax, which pays for most roads and infrastructure projects in the state, that revenue is going down because cars are getting more efficient, and yet Tennessee is growing rapidly. And cars get more efficient because of the new fuel standards, and there's a very simple gap. Yeah. And absolutely. Governor Haslam in that room, we're talking about taxes and Republicans. Governor Haslam, obviously a Republican, didn't want to ask for a tax increase. But my sense of that room was, and there were a lot of people from the distribution and logistics community and so on, that most of the business folks in the room were ready to say, no, you can tax me more, because we know the Lamar Corridor, we know all these projects, because that's the lifeblood of Memphis. But your sense of that, of his tour and his effort going into the legislative session next year, is he going to get the funding he needs to fund these projects? And would you support a gas tax?
Well, first of all, the fact that we're even having the discussion is significant progress, because we were trying, many of us in positions like mine, over the previous 4 years, our first term, or my first term, we were really kind of prodding the state to take a position, because we could see that our roads were deteriorating. We have 800 miles of roadway in Shelby County, and we're paving about 20 miles of that annually, and it's going down more and more. So the fact that we're having the discussion is progress. Now, I understand the governor's reticence to really step out on a tax at this time, because taxation is anathema to most Tennesseans. But I do think that there's some discussion that's taking place about how can the state maybe realign some funding. And I know Speaker Harwell has mentioned a couple of options that need to be considered. So I think those need to be considered before we mandate a tax. But the reality of it is, if we don't do something quickly, either with a gas tax or with realigning some of the state finances, we are going to find ourselves in a critical situation. So something's got to be done, and we just got to find the way to do it.
Yeah, Bill, just a couple minutes left.
Yes, going back to the schools for a second, it sounds like the school system leaders might need to be at the table for this summit, or might need to have a discussion as part of the summit.
Well, I'll be real quick because I know Van wants to weigh in there. I think there's a place and a time to bring the educators to the table. I think the intent of this summit is to get our house in order. Mm-hmm. Let's get the administration of county government and the legislative body of county government a little bit closer aligned, and that'll be my objective.
I agree. I think we need to do that, but this first meeting just really needs to be focused on the administration and the commission. I think we bring in other stakeholders after that.
Right. Because there were some differences in this past budget season between the commission and the administration on this. And to people who watch that process, it can seem personal at times. Mm-hmm. It's not as personal as it seems, although certainly when someone is pushing for what they want and they don't get it, or it's modified.
Bill, I'll tell you real quick on that. I think our system works. It's designed to be an adversarial system. That's the way it was set up by our founding fathers, and I think we have a very healthy adversarial system.
Yeah.
All right. All right, you agree. All right, thank you both for being here. We're out of time. Thank you, Bill. Thanks for joining us. Join us again next week. We end on a smiling adversarial.